Alrighty, so good morning, everybody, and happy Friday. You are in Ballroom 2. Just to get your navigation correct, today at the Finance Indaba, this is the first ballroom on this row, then Ballroom 3 and 4. And then if you're looking on your programs and you want the boardrooms, you have to go out through the main doors. As if you're going to the lavatory, you'll see a sign that gives you direction to the boardrooms. And then the fintech room is also on the further side. And then the main stage is the one that we were projecting off of. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Didi Sihume, and I'll be your moderator in this ballroom the whole day. So we're going to start with our first topic for the day, and it is staying the course, what it really takes to succeed. I am privileged enough to have two panelists to sit with me this morning, and it is Christine Ramon. She's the lady on my furthest right, who is the CFO of Anglogold Ashanti, and Nishlan Samujh, who is the head of finance, or the CFO it is written, at Investec Bank. A round of applause for my panelists, please. So I know that our audience is made up of a lot of finance professionals at different levels. There are people who are sitting in our audience today who have just graduated, who are young professionals. There are middle managers and people who are growing their careers to getting to the level where you are now. So our conversation will be centered around how it is that one can stay the course to be successful, as the both of you currently are. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. So let me start with you, ma'am. Let's speak about your career. Where did your career start, and what are the tenures or the periods that you've spent at those companies?
Well, firstly, I studied part-time for chartered accountancy, so clearly did the BCom and BCom honours degrees, studied through Coopers & Lybrand at the time, and progressed to audit manager. I was in total with Coopers & Lybrand stroke PwC now for a period of about 10 years. After that, I went into commerce and industry, and I joined Johnny Holdings, which is a telecoms, media, and entertainment group. I was there for 11 years, and thereafter joined Sasol as the CFO, and was there for 7.5 years.
Sure.
I took a short break after Sasol, and I'm now with Anglogold Ashanti for about just over 3 years.
Okay, so I see that there's a line or a pattern in your stay at these companies. Can you just speak to us about the importance of staying a little longer than, 3 years?
Well, look, I even think 3 years is too short. I think certainly, it takes time to progress in an organization, but I think it's also not about rushing to get to the next level. It's about consolidating your experience and also being able to apply your knowledge in an organization to be able to add value. And so, my view is that one needs to be at an organization for at least 5 years to be able to both consolidate your experience and add value. I think, to develop as a leader, it does take time and it takes maturity. And that certainly does not come overnight. And it's about not just yourself, it's about your team, it's about building your team and earning respect within the organization, and I think that does take time.
Thanks for that. Nishlan, good morning.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us. We've put you as the rose between the tulips.
Privileged on Friday the 13th.
Would you be so kind as to share with us your journey in the finance world, and how long have you been at Investec?
Just over 17 years.
17?
Yeah. That gets you worried. Don't worry. So, I trained at Durban Westville, got my sort of degree out there in postgrad. I decided post getting my postgrad that there were two areas that I felt was weak in my studies. One was management accounting and really getting behind the nitty-gritty, and the other was taxation. So I decided to enroll for an HTIP tax just to pick up that element. And I was lucky enough in my third year to get a bursary from Sasol, leaving me with a 2-year contract.
Okay.
Resisted ending up in Sasolburg or Secunda, so I was lucky to land up in Rosebank, actually.
All right.
At Sasol Chemical Industries. spent all of 7 months at Sasol, and then ended up in Investec. And don't get me wrong, in my first 2 years at Investec, I was as itchy as could be.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely, because you're young, you want to know what's out there. You kind of you're in the exploratory stage of your life, and that itchiness, I think, to some degree, having the right sponsors in the organization and having individuals that I kind of attached to, and getting different layers of exposure into the organization changed it after a period of time. And 17 years, yes, it's 17 years, but I can almost account for renewal in almost every 2 to 3 years in that stint.
That's lovely to hear. Okay, so I think maybe how we should break down the ability to be able to stay in a company is to see what are the driving forces, or what are the prospects that make you stay in the company. Let me go back to you and ask you, do you think that initially employees should be looking at the salary bracket or their pay, or do you think that comes later?
I think, if I just look at myself, I started working, straight after school and did my articles. And of course, salary is not a key motivator at that point in time. But I think, certainly as you become more senior, at manager level in an organization, you are, I would say at that level, you then start, you can call it, where you should be concerned about your salary. And firstly, are you earning the salary for, getting the value for what you're actually putting into an organization. But I think certainly it's not only that. You've got to get job satisfaction. And I think what makes one actually stay with an organization is really the job satisfaction and the ability to add value, and are you making that difference? And, yes, in your role, whatever role it may be in an organization, I think it's also at a more senior level where you can actually influence what it is that you want. And you can be more proactive about, requesting to be involved in certain special projects, because I think that's really where you also can make a difference. But I think it does come a bit later on. I think you've got to prove yourself first as a junior in an organization. And I think this is where I do see a difference to when I actually started working, that the young people that do come in, they sort of want that instant gratification. And all I'm saying is be a little patient and have that patience and put that effort into the organization to reap the benefits.
Yeah, but I also think you mustn't lose sight of that hunger to actually want gratification at the end of the day, because there are things that drive you. The only point is don't use a single lens to judge whether you are getting that gratification. It's important to be able to be dynamic in an organization. It's important to be able to understand that it's not just about the rungs in terms of growing. In fact, in my career at Investec, what really grew out of it was actually the network, because it's an organization of people at the end of the day. And if you find that you've been called on, if you find that if there's a need for you to be a part of, then you feel the sense of growth. But if you find yourself behind a desk delivering to task A and task B, and not necessarily being involved in the outcome, and not necessarily being involved in how you are actually driving the organization forward, then ask yourself the question, why? And get behind those questions. And I think often what we do is we ask ourselves why, and we blame the environment around us. And the one fundamental principle I've been taught at the organization is understand yourself first. And if you can understand yourself first and understand that you are the driver of your career, you are the driver of where you lead to next, you are going to find limiting factors. You are going to, people are different, environments are different. My experience, maybe 70% of it is luck. Maybe I was at the right place at the right time. But we also make what you've got to put in the effort to make what needs to be real for you. And that starts from day one. Mm-hmm. How do you show up? Who are you? Okay? how do you sit back and wait for direction, and how do you take that? How do you listen? How do you interact? Who are you in the outcome? Who are you in the driving seat? All of those things matter. And I think sometimes even when we're at a junior level in our career, we continuously leaving it up to somebody else to drive our career.
Those are very valid points that you're making about being accountable for your career. But I'm assuming you came across some really good mentors, or you had some managers that really steered you in the right way. Please speak to us about when you step up and you ask for more responsibility and you want to do more, what that means to your manager or your mentor.
So absolutely, throughout my career, I have had mentors, and I wouldn't only call them formal mentors. I think certainly mentors outside of the organization, people that, in the broader business network, that you can actually seek their input on certain issues. I think I do appreciate, the point that I wanted to make earlier as well is what keeps one with an organization is the culture.
Okay.
And the alignment, to both the strategy as well as the leadership in the company. So I think if someone had to sort of join, and this is certainly what I actually look for. I do look for track record when I employ people in the organization. It's extremely important.
Okay.
It's important that people can demonstrate what they want, but also that they're prepared to put the effort into it. So exactly the point that Nishlan made. So I certainly appreciate people showing initiative and not only doing what they expected to do.
The bare minimum.
The bare minimum. And, but I think likewise you're working, we are a very big organization, Anglogold Ashanti, 54,000 employees across various continents ranging from Africa, the Americas, as well as Australia. And it's important talking specifically to the finance function, we've just recently had a finance workshop to bring the leadership of the regions together so that we can actually align our strategy to the group. And that's actually very important because it enables you, once you align to that strategy, you're able to define what are the key measures to bring that alignment, and you're able to set the KPIs throughout the group, and then clearly from the leadership, it filters down into the organization. And I think as people are hungry for work, it's important that they also align themselves to the measures that are set by the company. So ultimately, you're actually driving towards the same goal in an organization. So I certainly appreciate the hunger, but I think the alignment is extremely important as well.
That's a very valid point. Nishlan, can you speak to us about the culture and alignment as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'll go to certain principles that I live by, which is if I don't feel like I'm part of, then I shouldn't be there. That doesn't mean that if I don't feel like I'm part of today, that I can't be there today. Because the next question I ask myself is, what needs to change and how do I influence that? And then, every organization's got a different culture. Every organization's got a different heartbeat. Every organization has a particular way about conducting themselves. Christine's with 54,000 people. We've got 8,500 individuals. And then you look at the entire platform. This is a highly, highly competitive industry that we're in. Finances is whether you're walking around the globe or whether you're walking in South Africa, every corner you look, you're going to find competition around you. So when you're in an organization as well, those competitive forces are going to be all around you. Yes, there is one CFO role, and yes, there is one divisional head role. But again, if you are able to interact with the organization and create space for yourself, then all of a sudden, those competitive forces look very, very different. And you start interacting with the world very, very differently. So, culture is an important part of it, and knowing the culture of the organization and understanding how you fit into that, understanding the strategy of the organization. Now, I'm going to repeat the words that Christine made, and it may just seem boring at the end of the day, but the reality of these things is they are simple when it comes down to words, from an executional perspective, it's who am I and how do I show up? And I think those are fundamental to how you are seen in an organization, and how you grow in an organization, and how you take yourself and propel it to the next level.
Okay, and I think we're still speaking about one taking accountability, right? Because you're still saying, how am I seeing myself and how am I seen in the organization that I'm a part of? And Christine just spoke about mentors. Have you had supporters or people that have channeled your career and guided you to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were many times when I didn't even know that guidance was taking place.
Okay.
So I do think it's important that you do understand where your sponsorship in the organization lies. I think it's important that you understand who are the different role players. I think it's important that you understand where your influence sphere is. And it's important that you do identify with, I'm not necessarily a proponent for absolute formalities of mentorship. Because at the end of the day, it's advice I gave my son this morning when he was going to school. You really have to, at the end of the day, take responsibility for yourself before you impart that onto someone else.
Okay.
Right? And when it comes to the formality of mentorship, I think sometimes we enter it with a mindset that this person is going to create the path for me. And if you follow that, sometimes it will succeed, but many times it won't. Because who's the driver at the end of the day? And I think that's what's really, really important to keep in your mind.
It's important for you to be in the driving seat of your life and your career.
If I could just add something, I think what's also important about mentorship is the fact that they are your sounding board. So like I said, you can have numerous mentors and you can draw, let's just say, input from a number of different sources. I think the most important thing that I think is that they're your sort of 360-degree feedback.
Okay.
And you don't have one source to do that, right? So it's important to take that feedback to be able to see how you can actually improve on yourself. Because, yes, we are responsible for ourselves, but we can't see ourselves only through our own lenses. It's important for us to be open to receiving input, from others. Be it our superiors, our peers, our subordinates, because that's the only way we can actually improve and make ourselves actually better leaders.
So for somebody who's slightly junior in their career in the room right now and is looking for practical ways of getting forward, let's just speak about instances in your careers. Have you had times perhaps when you didn't see eye to eye with the manager, or you felt maybe your manager was slightly tough on you? How did you then take the driving seat and sort of push your career to where it needed to be? Did you at any point feel like the feedback you were given wasn't fair?
I'll give you one very, very simple example. I walked into Investec, it must have been week 3, and I was trying to resolve an issue. I didn't understand a particular issue, so I found out on the ledger system, well, Anna Marie passed that journal entry. Thank God she's not in the audience. And I got a number and I picked up the phone and called her. And after a couple of very abrasive words back to me, she put the phone down.
Oui.
Right? And that could be the end of it. And it could be me giving up on what I was trying to resolve. And it could be the end of a relationship. Well, after a period of about 6 months, I think we became reasonably best mates in the organization. Now, the first thing I could have seen through that lens was racism. The first thing I could have seen through that lens was someone who didn't want me to proceed in my career. The first thing I could have seen in that lens is I don't belong here. All right? But I somehow saw it differently. And I'm not saying that every situation's the same, because we live in a country where I think there are many dynamics that are applying every day, continuously. But the way we perceive things and the way we take it in and the way we fight to resolve makes a huge difference. So those are examples. Up till this day, I might sit with trying to resolve something with Stephen, and I think, there was a situation where we were working onto something, and he's sending me messages on you're just not getting it, you're just not getting it, but not the solution. Now again, I could resolve this by, what the hell is this guy on about? You know, and can't he see what I'm trying to portray at the end of the day? But then listening to the conversation, just taking that period to sit back and listen to the feedback. Because often when we've worked on things for 3 days or 6 days or over a long weekend, and you come back and your first thing that you get is negative feedback, your reaction is to become defensive around it. Your reaction is, well, you know, what the hell's going on here? Does no one respect what I'm delivering? And we forget to listen. We forget to take the input. We forget to process. And, you know, there's no magical wand here that's going to bring that in. Emotion is going to be part of it. The way we deal with things is going to be part of it. But if you have that ability to switch on different elements of your brain, and as Christine said earlier, remember, you're looking at aspects through your lens. And there are many other lenses in the organization. And if you're able to allow yourself to be perceptive to those different lenses, it's going to make a huge difference. And sometimes we try and align ourselves to the easiest path that's out there. You know, look at what's happening in the world today. You've got someone like Elon Musk that is dealing with trying to get a spaceship or a rocket to fly up and land back down and reuse it all of the time. Do you think that's a choice of the easiest path to create the next solution out there? So when you go into finance, what you see as the easiest path is not necessarily the only path. And if you're continuously breaking barriers, and if you're part of that breaking in barriers, you create a different platform.
So easy does it, doesn't always do it.
Well, sometimes it does, but not always.
I think for me, you know, throughout your career, it doesn't matter if you're junior or senior or manager or leader, you are going to be picking up conflict. For me, what's important is that when feedback is actually given, it's important that it's not personal.
Okay.
It's got to be objective feedback, and if you feel that your manager is attacking on your person, then I believe that is something that you've got to make them aware of, and that's got to be corrected. You know, and one can't really generalize. You know, throughout my career, I have actually received feedback, both positive and relating to developmental aspects.
Okay.
And I'd say even today, I've got issues to develop on, but I don't see that as negative. I think it's important that we are open to feedback and that we are able to positively, take it on positively and actually work on it. There are sometimes in public forums that, you know, as you advance in your career, be it, and I can give you an example, I'm the chair of the CFO forum, and we recently have, we've objected to mandatory audit firm rotation, and we still believe that our stance is valid because of the impact on the economy. It's going to be a huge cost burden to the economy, and it's going to create huge risk for the environment, for the economy, for companies being able to deal with it. And however, we realize that, you know, the regulator has legislated now, and transformation is a big issue in the country.
Right.
So we're not saying that this is the right tool to achieve transformation, but we're saying, well, let's acknowledge this is where we're at today. Let's see how we can actually take it forward in a proactive and positive manner in terms of seeing how can we now influence the transitional provisions relating to mandatory audit firm rotation with the regulator. Okay. So I think there's a certain point, if you just had to take that example and apply it to yourself as a person in terms of feedback that you get from your manager, I think important that there's no emotions and personal issues involved. If you can then step beyond that and you look at, so what is it that I can actually work on, and how can I work together with my manager to improve myself and improve others that actually work with me, then I think that's how you can actually take it forward positively. And the same is going to apply one day when you sit in a boardroom. You know, there are going to be differences of views around the table, and there's no such a thing as right or wrong. Ultimately, the best decision has to be made in the best interests of the company. And the same with shareholders. You're not all going to have the same view.
Yeah.
And it's about how do you take it on. I mean, when I joined Anglogold Ashanti just over 3 years ago now, our shareholders, it was a huge embarrassment for us because we wanted to, the company was debt burdened. We needed to raise equity to bring down the debt and the balance sheet. And the right thing would have been for shareholders to inject capital in the company, but the shareholders did not want to do that. And they said, well, sorry, we reject your proposal. You've got to resort to self-help measures. As a management team then, we did not agree with that. However, we had to take on board what our shareholders have actually said, and we had to look at self-help measures to deal with the balance sheet of the company. So I'm just saying it's going to happen
At different levels.
At different levels in your life, and you really need to learn how to deal with it.
And I think it takes a sense of maturity to be able to say, this is the best interest of the firm. And you just made a very valid point about working well together with your teams or the people that you work with and creating synergy. I think sometimes they need to be forced. You need to force yourself to say, I really need to work with these people well, just to make sure that we can deliver and that there are results. And Nishlan, when we were preparing for this, you had spoken to my colleague Graham about creating a network. Do you think that perhaps Investec is the kind of institution that allows you to create a network between the different departments from floor to floor per se? Or do you think that you can create a lovely network just within your finance team?
Yeah, I think, if you speak to different people at Investec, you'll get different perspectives. One is, if I've got a client base, I'm going to want to look after that client base, and I'm going to want to be as protective as possible. And the natural instinct is for you to maximize what you can create return for yourself on, and to be very protective around that. What we continuously bombard with at Investec is to remind yourself that the sum of the parts must create a bigger whole at the end of the day. And if we don't understand that, and if we don't understand that having a client today is not the same as having a client tomorrow, then those protective natures that's simply focused on my pocket will win the day. So the organization puts in a lot to remind. You've got to just have these different layers that are continuously playing at the end of the day. From a finance perspective, when I joined back in 2000, info that we delivered from finance and info that business leaders delivered in the boardroom was different. Right? And we could have just sat back and simply accepted the fact that that's the most current, he knows what's going on, the finance systems have closed off on the 30th day of the month, we've got what we need, and that's the end of our role. The things that we worked on is, why are there these different communication channels in the organization, and how do we close that out, and how do we create the right pipes that need to exist in the organization, and how do we become business partners? And that couldn't happen without networking. And it couldn't happen with finance thinking that it is finance, and that's the end of it. The mindset that we try to employ at the end of the day is, if we don't have a product out there, if we don't have the ability to deliver to a client base, if we don't have ability to create a return to a shareholder, if we don't have the ability to compete out there, then this environment's not going to exist. So yes, I am finance, and yes, I've got to run, I think, what is a very, very disciplined core at the end of the day. But you've also got to be part of the organization. And that's where networking becomes so important. And from my perspective and my personal growth in the organization, at the end of the day, networking created defense mechanisms. Because I became an element that different elements of the organization needed or wanted to be part of at the end of the day. And that's where, it's like creating a spider web. If you've got that strength, it's a huge difference to being just a single thread that's lying out there.
And Christine, what does networking mean to you?
I think networking both within and outside the organization is extremely important.
Okay.
I think it makes it's not just about you.
Okay.
It's about achieving the goals of the organization.
Right.
So even as a finance function, I encourage my teams to network, to understand. So to give you an example, if we're sort of driving this XBRL project in our group.
Okay.
But, you're stronger when you first understand the landscape, when you understand not only doing your own research, but understanding that research involves benchmarking against what other companies are doing, what products are they using to achieve that. So I've given you one small example, but that is the benefits of networking, because it enables you to just think broader, and to make a better decision in the interest of the company. And that doesn't only apply in finance, it applies to everyone in the organization. It doesn't mean to say that you're breaching levels of confidence or confidentiality. I think not at all. It just makes you better. And as you move into different positions in the business network, when you sit on boards of companies, etc., I think that's really when networks also become extremely important, because it enables you to be a broader and a more influential leader in the company. Also, being in tune with the market and with the environment is very important, and that's what your networks enable you to do as well.
Those are very valid points. Thank you so much. And I think you've given us quite insightful a meaning to staying within a company and making sure that you grow as an individual. And I think that the rewards are some intangible, actually. Can you just speak to points of how you've felt rewarded by staying there? Perhaps it's in the relationships that you've created, because some of those relationships can possibly extend out of the office, or is it been in a transaction or a deal that you've worked on that was so successful that couldn't have gone any other way because of the longevity of your time at the institution?
Yeah, I see it almost every day in terms of the way I'm interacting with individuals, the outcome of transactions, the success of an initiative. And often the outcome doesn't sit here. The outcome might be in some distant aspect in the organization. And having line of sight, sometimes I think what we tend to do is we create measurement within extremely tight boxes. And because of those tight boxes, success means that if I see visibility within that box, then I have success. Yeah. Meanwhile, it's actually lying somewhere else. I'm just going to come back to a simple point, is that evolution doesn't happen by taking each of the weak points. It's about continuously challenging the next frontier. And if you are able to see that in success, where you are seeing evolution in the organization, not just a simple outcome. Am I influencing the way we do things tomorrow? And if you don't have your eye out there, like now, we've got to ask ourselves, how do we partner with technology that exists today? We as individuals can look at things like robotics as the biggest challenge that will be out there. Well, trust me, the coal industry saw the biggest challenge of their life. When electricity became a reality, there's a lot that had to change around in that period. So for us as finance, if we are not going to allow ourselves to partner with technology that's out there, if we're not going to allow ourselves to be part of, then the carpet's going to be pulled from under us. All right? So I know I'm divesting from, sort of digressing a little bit. The point I'm just trying to make is that be wise and be in tune with what's out there and be part of it rather than running away from it. It's just so important. And when you're looking for success, don't look for success in what you would see as your normal quadrants. Okay, understand, what have I done in this organization? What have I been part of? And that success might lie with someone else, and that visibility might lie with someone else. But the reality is you'll be surprised at how often recognition circles its way back, because there are many in the organization that actually understands who were the driving forces behind that resolution?
Sure,
So
you can
for
add
me,
there.
the 10 years that I've spent in organisation, I think the important thing is the legacy that you do leave behind. The saddest part for me when I've transitioned organisations has been leaving my teams behind.
Okay.
But I must say that it also gave me joy to see that, you know, my former financial controller at Sasol has now become the CFO.
Lovely.
So that's good. So I've seen people develop. I've maintained relationships because a number of people have moved to different organizations, people that I've worked very closely with in finance, and they've advanced in their career. I still maintain contact with them. So that's really given me the biggest joy. I think the satisfaction comes from having been involved in value-creating transactions. At Anglogold, bringing down the debt, and now we're able to focus on growth in the company. And I think, you know, I've been very much part of the evolution you know, as a CFO in the various companies that I've served with, in evolving the finance function from a traditional function when I joined the company to become more of a business partner, because I think that's really critical in this day and age for finance to really remain, you know, to be relevant and to help the business in creating value. At the end of the day, finance is an enabler, and we actually there to be the glue for the business, to help the business actually think in a more integrated manner, so that we can advance the company forward. So I think if that's the few words that I have regarding that.
And those are really great responses. But I think I'm going to give our audience an opportunity to ask one or two questions. If somebody does have a question, I've already seen a hand. I have some rules in this room. I need you to say your name, which institution you are from, as well as your question. If you can be as brief and concise as possible, I'll appreciate that. Thank you very much. Just pass it to her, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Zimbini Mangalana, and I'm from the Auditor General. This is to both of you. Do you ever feel that your color has sort of propelled your success this far, or are you ever made to feel by your peers in the industry that your color somehow sort of put an exponential factor into where you are? The reason why I ask is that I think 2 days ago on the Mail and Guardian, the issue with the UCT professor, when you're reading the comments, you will find, no, these BEE jobs and whatnot. So that's why I'm kind of, it's in my heart right now that I feel okay, these are things that we need to talk about. Thank you.
I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, and I can only answer it from a personal perspective. Again, being in the organization for, I think, having provided almost 17 years of my career to the organization, I'll be highly disappointed if I'm sitting as a CFO of the organization on the basis of my color. I can't be, you know, silly to the fact that at the end of the day, was that me? At the end of the day, transformation is a fundamental component of the South African landscape. And that is going to create opportunity, especially for an individual of color. And I can't be neglectful to the fact that that is an element that does exist. But it doesn't create longevity at the end of the day. It doesn't create a platform at the end of the day. It doesn't create something that I would be part of if I'm simply being placed into a role. So what I see at the organization that gives me clear evidence is, number one, is being part of. Number two is being involved in the conversations. Number three is having a voice and having an influence in the organization. I see that continuously, and therefore I think there's a continuous validation that this is not just a placement.
To agree with that, but I do need to add that transformation in our environment is extremely important. So I know in many of our recruitment processes at Anglogold Ashanti, it is a key, you know, it's part of the criteria. So it's not that equity is the only criteria, but it's certainly part of a broader criteria when we actually look for candidates to appoint. I think as regards myself, I would tend to agree with Nishlan that I worked very hard. I studied part-time, so we didn't have money. So I had to work and pay for my studies, and I worked very hard. Qualified as a chartered accountant, stayed on at the auditing firm, and then only left to, into commerce and industry. And I think it is very much your track record that will set you apart as a candidate for appointments. So track record, it's how, and then the people that you worked with, not only in the organization, but the stakeholders that you've dealt with, be it the banks, be it shareholders and the like, they actually become, in essence, part of your reference check. So it is about how do you prove yourself in an organization and in your dealings with your stakeholders and others that really takes you forward. So that's really the most important. So I wouldn't say that it's purely equity that actually is the reason why we actually have achieved what we have in our positions.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? I can take one more. There we go. Please remember to say your name, where you're from, and then shoot straight to your question.
Panashe Chamboko from T-Systems South Africa. My question is from a young professional that's just getting into the industry. Do you think that there's a way that you get yourself noticed within an industry or within a company, or is it mostly based on maybe the leadership that you have? I'm thinking, should I put my hand up all the time? Because that's the one thing that I know everyone says to a young professional. They always say, offer yourself up for the next project, for the next thing that has to be done. But in my experience, it's not always the case that someone who's putting their hand up is the most noticed. So what other thing am I supposed to do as a young professional to make sure that I'm outstanding within the organization, to ensure that I grow within that organization?
Thank you.
I think it's both. You've got to have good alignment with your manager. But then it's also about, I generally, if I talk about myself, I like people who are energetic and enthusiastic about, contributing to the organization. So I think if you can certainly make a difference in those projects that you put up your hand for, because then it's not just your manager that will notice you. There will be other managers that will notice you, and I think opportunities will really come from that.
I also think that it's, if I go back to my personal journey, I was a very shy individual who wouldn't interact in environments, wouldn't necessarily show up in meetings, wouldn't necessarily have a voice in every aspect. And very early on in my career, I started to notice that had an impact. And it's how do you start changing and understand what are your strengths. So for example, my strength was technical accounting with an element of taxation that enabled me to get behind structuring of transactions and show up with your strengths and recognize your weaknesses. So sometimes if we're going to put our hands up and we are going to be part of, but there's zero value add, well, that's not going to propel you anywhere. It's not going to take you to the next level. And I think if you've got your eye out on how things are being resolved and what happened and what changed and who had a role to play in that, self-teaching and self-learning and self-adjustment are just so important as you move along in an organization.
Thank you very much for answering our 2 questions. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this conversation. A round of applause for my panelists, please.